Alex Van Halen says the world never heard the version of Eruption that almost destroyed Eddie Van Halen's career, and the mistake behind it was so personal that Eddie wanted it erased forever. Alex Van Halen speaks about Eddie Van Halen with the weight of memory and love in every word. He does not sound like a drummer explaining music history. He sounds like a brother revealing a secret that has been hidden behind loud amplifiers and screaming fans for decades. Alex Van Halen says people believe Eruption arrive fully formed like a lightning strike, but the truth is far more human and far more fragile. Eddie Van Halen made a mistake before Eruption became legendary. That mistake was believing he needed to impress the world instead of trusting his instincts. Eddie chased speed, clarity, and perfection so hard that the music began to lose its soul. Alex remembers Eddie stopping mid-take, pulling the headphones off, frustrated, questioning whether the sound meant anything beyond technique. The room felt tense because brilliance was fighting insecurity. Eddie worried that listeners would hear only noise or ego instead of emotion. Alex Van Halen watched his brother struggle with doubt, even as he was creating something no one had ever heard before. Eddie almost walked away from the recording, convinced it was unfinished or wrong. The mistake was trying to control every note instead of letting the feeling breathe. Alex says the turning point came when Eddie stopped thinking like a guitarist and started thinking like a storyteller. His hands moved freely, tapping, sliding, bending, not to show off, but to speak. The sound that followed was raw, imperfect, and alive. Alex knew instantly that this was different. The drums were no longer following a solo, they were supporting a confession. Eruption was no longer a display, it was a moment. Alex explains that Eddie never wanted to repeat it exactly again because it represented a specific emotional state once passed. It could not be recreated. The mistake taught Eddie a lifelong lesson, that music is not about domination, it is about surrender. Alex Van Halen believes that without that early mistake, Eruption would never have existed. In its true form, it would have been clean, impressive, and forgettable, instead of dangerous, emotional, and eternal. Eddie learned that vulnerability carries more power than precision. That realization shaped everything that followed, not just Van Halen records, but the way Eddie approached sound, experimentation, songwriting, and even silence. Alex says, Eruption lives because it was almost lost. That edge, that tension, that fear is embedded in every note, making listeners feel something, even if they cannot explain why. Alex Van Halen wants people to understand that legends are built from moments of uncertainty, not certainty. Eddie Van Halen did not erupt because he was confident, he erupted because he faced doubt and played through attacks. Van Halen continues by saying that after Eruption, Eddie changed as a musician and as a person. He became less concerned with approval and more committed to honesty. The mistake that nearly derailed the track freed him from creative fear. Eddie realized that the most dangerous thing an artist can do is chase expectations. Alex says his brother learned to let accidents guide discovery. Many of Eddie's most iconic sounds came from mistakes, miswired gear, broken amps, or moments when things did not behave as planned. Eruption was the first time Eddie truly embraced that philosophy. The track was never meant to be a blueprint, it was a release. Alex remembers fans asking Eddie how to play Eruption note for note, and Eddie smiling because he knew that was missing the point. The soul of the piece could not be copied, only felt. The mistake taught Eddie that replication kills magic. Alex Van Halen believes this is why Eddie's influence runs deeper than technique. He changed how musicians think about expression, risk, and individuality. Eruption was not a lesson in speed, it was a lesson in courage. Eddie showed that exposing your inner chaos can be more powerful than hiding behind perfection. Alex ends by saying that when people listen to Eruption, they are not just hearing a guitar, they are hearing a human being on the edge, choosing truth over safety. That is why it still matters, that is why it still shocks, and that is why the mistake behind it was the greatest gift Eddie Van Halen ever gave to music. Continues the story of Eruption by saying that the true aftermath of recording the legendary solo is rarely understood by fans or musicians alike. He explains that Eddie Van Halen did not celebrate immediately because he was processing what had just happened in the studio. Alex says, Eddie walked around the room, holding his guitar like it had just revealed a secret that no one was supposed to hear. He was both terrified and exhilarated at the same time. The mistake he had made earlier almost kept that moment from existing, and Eddie knew it. Every note that emerged after that near disaster was filled with a raw honesty that he had never allowed before. Alex remembers watching his brother hesitate over every riff, every bend, every tap with a seriousness that Alex had never seen. Eddie stopped playing to question whether it felt right or impressive, and for the first time he chose right over perfection. The studio lights flickered across the room as Eddie sections, listening intently to what the guitar was saying to him and not what he was trying to tell the world. Alex says that this is when Eddie realized that music is a living thing and not a machine to be controlled. The mistake of trying to force brilliance had almost silenced the solo, but letting go gave it life. Alex explains that from that moment on, Eddie approached music with a different philosophy. He no longer cared about comparisons or competition, he cared about feeling and honesty. Alex remembers rehearsals where Eddie would stop mid-performance because something felt empty or forced. He would start over not to fix a technical problem but to capture a heartbeat or a breath. Or a tone that communicated truth, Alex says. Fans often ask why Eddie never played Eruption the same way twice live, and the answer is simple. It was never about replication, it was about emotion and spontaneity. The mistake he made early on taught him that rigidity kills magic and unpredictability creates connection. Alex Van Halen continues by explaining that Eddie began to embrace accidents, broken strings, misfired notes, and strange harmonics because they were honest and alive. He realized that the human element was more compelling than technical perfection. The tapping section, which fans now worship, was born out of instinct and release, not calculation, and it became a signature moment because it was unplanned. Alex remembers his brother sitting silently after recording sessions, listening to the playback, not smiling, not celebrating, but absorbing what had happened. Eddie knew that the solo was special, but he also understood that it could never be repeated exactly, and that is what made it eternal. Alex Van Halen says that Eruption became a lesson, not only in music but in life, that mistakes can become gateways to creativity, and fear can be a guide, if acknowledged and not suppressed. Alex explains that Eddie used that lesson in every aspect of his music, from tone, design to songwriting to live improvisation. He stopped trying to impress and started trying to communicate. He let the instrument speak and he listened. Alex Van Halen remembers the tension in the studio during those sessions and how he could feel Eddie wrestling with doubt and control at the same time. The mistake of overthinking almost robbed the world of a solo that defined a generation, and Alex says that this is the hidden story that nobody tells. Eddie was constantly questioning himself, wondering if listeners would hear the intention or just speed and flash. Alex says that fear is something only creators understand. And that is why the triumph of Eruption feels so profound. It was not a simple demonstration of skill, it was a confession, a declaration, and a breakthrough all at once. Alex Van Halen continues by saying that after Eruption, Eddie carried the lesson everywhere. He questioned his choices constantly and sought honesty and sound over applause. He experimented endlessly, not to prove superiority, but to communicate deeper truths. Alex recalls watching him in the studio bending notes, exploring harmonics, trying combinations that should have failed, but never did, because he trusted the moment. Eddie learned that mistakes can be transformed into moments of genius if you stop resisting them. Alex says, this lesson changed the dynamic of Van Halen forever. The band began to feed off the unpredictability and sincerity in Eddie playing. The energy became palpable, and performances were never just technical displays, they were conversations between musicians and listeners. Alex explains that Eruption remains iconic, not because it is the fastest or most complicated solo ever played, but because it is alive. It is the culmination of fear, courage, and intuition. Alex remembers his brother telling him late one night that the solo was a release and a surrender, that it was the moment he stopped pretending and started being himself fully. Alex Van Halen believes that this message is what inspired generations of guitarists to focus on expression over perfection, to embrace mistakes, and to seek truth in their own music. He says that most fans only hear the final tape, but the journey, the struggle, and the almost failure are what made it powerful. Alex concludes by saying that Eruption is a reminder that creativity is fragile, that mistakes can lead to magic, and that courage is essential. Eddie Van Halen faced a mistake that could have silenced him forever and chose honesty instead. That choice echoes through every note of Eruption and every guitar solo that dares to be real and raw. The mistake was the seed, the solo was the flower, and the world has never forgotten the sound of a human being breaking free. Alex Van Halen ends by saying that when listeners play Eruption, they are hearing not just a technical marvel, but a human story, a confession and a triumph born from doubt, fear, and a single mistake that became legendary. And that is why Eruption will never fade, because truth is eternal and Eddie courage is immortal.